Hey everybody, just starting the live stream here. We're waiting for Posh Redneck, otherwise known as Sava. He'll be joining us from Serbia today. And we're going to get into all kinds of interesting stuff. Got a bit of a list here of topics, but I think we'll let it drift to wherever it wants to go as well. Um, so what I've got so far is we're going to touch on language and how the world of words is created. And when I say world of words, I mean people that are living in reaction to words and language and thoughts rather than actual presence and awareness of what's going on in and around the actual body. So we'll touch on that and why that's important. Also, generally, the idea of presence and awareness and attention, what these are for, how you can train them or better utilize them, let's say. Now, we're also going to discuss a little bit about prayer, the power and the function of prayer and the how-to of prayer and the purpose behind it, rather than something like begging. We'll get into some deeper aspects of that. And then I'd also like to get into, if we end up with time, the fallacies in the worlds of healing, in the worlds of psychology, psychotherapy, psychiatry, and then the world of fake spirituality, which is a giant umbrella term covering all different kinds of practices and ideas. And one other thing I want to touch on as well is about this fetishization of trauma and how damaging that is, and what you can do instead if you do experience an extremely intense life event that could be called trauma. And then also how undoing tension in the body and coming out of the mind in the world of words actually has the potential to lead you to an awareness of the truth, which then also may lead you down the road of becoming aware of God, the Creator, and then also the Eastern Orthodoxy or the Eastern Orthodox Christian Church, which I found is fundamentally different than any other form of Christianity that I'd ever encountered prior to that. And I find that I've had a bunch of clients that were involved in the radical undoing that were atheists or otherwise agnostics who later found their way to orthodoxy. Now, this happened with multiple different clients all over the world. And I got in touch with them, over the years and found out that they had joined some kind of Eastern Orthodox church. And that still continues to this day with certain clients. So it's not something that I was ever pushing, although I joined myself in the Serbian Orthodox Church here in Croatia. But we'll discuss how and why that might be. And then in that you'll get a little bit of an understanding of what Orthodoxy is, how it's different from other forms of Christianity, and maybe you might get excited to go check out a liturgy or visit a church or a monastery yourself and find out in your direct experience how different it actually is. So that's the topics that we're going to get into today. Just waiting on Sava to jump on. So let me see if there's any stories I can tell you from the world of radical undoing that are fun and strange. Let's see. Well, there's a story of Will. You guys have seen him on the channel a few times before. It would be nice to have him on and do kind of a retrospective of all the training that he did with me and with Command Z. We also put on live workshops together in England. What's so cool about Will's story is when I met him, it was online. He took a series of 3 large workshops that we were putting on. It was the first intensives. What were the other 2? Social anxiety to social invincibility. And then the third one was hypnosis and undoing, which are 3 courses I put out a long time ago, legacy courses. Those will be available again on the summerland.acadal.com training site, Summerland Academy training site, very soon. So Will's story, he took those 3 workshops, then he jumped on weekly training and a daily training that we used to do, which will also be available on the training site sometime soon. So he hopped on there, and we had a lot of interaction, and then decided to put on a workshop. And I'll leave that story for later because I see that Posh has jumped on here. So I will leave that story for when I do another live stream. So someone remind me later to finish the story about Will. All right, let me bring Sava on here. Hey, what's going on?
Hello. Sorry for being a bit tardy.
That's okay. No worries, man. So, you know what? I should probably tag you in the description.
Right, I should share that I'm live with you.
And how do I tag you on the thing? It's like at just Posh. What is your actual YouTube at?
I think it's just at the Posh Redneck.
Okay.
Yes, it is. Okay. Let me find. Here we go. To share. Oh, you see, I'm learning stuff.
Your streams have been pretty cool so far. Interesting topics and everything. I'm trying to see if there's how it comes up in the description here. Let's go to my channel and click on this.
There we go.
Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. And actually, give me just a second. I'm going to grab my headphones. I kind of forgot.
Okay.
So you can entertain the people. I'll be right back.
I'm left to entertain the people. Well, people, we've been postponing this. Sometimes I had to postpone it. Other times Garrett had to. So it was quite a long time. And probably by providence, we ended up being here after his baptism. So the last time we spoke, I don't believe he was even a catechumen. And now he is a fully baptized member of the Orthodox Church.
There we go.
I don't think that was a set of headphones. That looked suspiciously like an ashtray.
Oh, I did bring an ashtray as well because I figured we'd both be smoking on the stream.
Yeah.
Even that's something that's kind of a rarity on YouTube. I don't know. Oh, yeah, I guess I see Andrew smoke on the Crucible.
Yeah.
He smokes in a funny way, though. It's like
yeah. It's very. I don't want to say performative, but it's that makes it sound like it's a what do you call them, a prop, but he almost uses it as a prop. And there's a very nice sense of Americana to it. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. It does have it. It has like a 50s kind of vibe.
Yeah. That's great. But we when we were planning the stream, multiple times, we wanted to make it a beer stream, and yet I hear from you that you've stopped drinking.
Yeah, I did stop drinking. And maybe for people who are not from the Balkan region or don't live here, they might not understand, but it's kind of like it's such a normalized part of the culture that
Yes.
It was interesting. There is an Alcoholics Anonymous here, which I won't join, and we'll talk about some of that type of stuff later today. I want to talk about the fallacy of some of these groups and identification as addict and healing and psychology, psychiatry, these kind of things. But I was amazed that there is this Alcoholics Anonymous here, just because I was imagining how bad it had to get for someone from the Balkans to decide to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. You know what I mean?
Probably more dangerous for people to find out that you're going to Alcoholics Anonymous
than to just keep drinking. Yeah.
People will take offense.
Yeah.
Aren't they a Protestant group? Right? They're not just some secular, maybe a bit That's how I understood it, you know. So
Yeah,
it
I
was
think
like,
it's
oh, you have
loosely
to realize
Protestant.
that you need God to get over this. So it's not just,
Yeah, so there is
psychology.
something. Yeah, yeah, there is some. I'm not sure if it's overtly Christian or not, but maybe maybe it varies from group to group. But they do have a manual, and the guy who wrote it had some, at least from what I understood, there was some ties to the occult, and that he was drawing on maybe tarot archetypes or something for the 12 steps, or or different or astrological principles or something like that. I'm not certain that that's still in there, but that's how I understood its origin.
Yeah, well, I only know it from pop culture, you know, like films and stuff. If it exists in Serbia, it's not going to be where I am. It's going to be in Belgrade or somewhere. You know, really doubt that that type of approach would work, even in Croatia.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but alcohol is a big thing. It's so social. It's so unrestricted. You know, I always found it strange. You know, when you hear about the US, you're not allowed to whatever it was drink in public. You
Yeah.
know, you had to have it in like a paper bag or something,
Yeah.
and that was so foreign to me. In my experience, where it's everywhere here. You know. If you remember when you visited Nice, we just sit there on the bay of the Nishava River. You could just sit there and drink. It's a very common thing. You don't have to cover it up. You don't have to do anything. It's just a thing you do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually enjoyed it very much, but I noticed in the last 3 or 4 months, I was drinking every day, and
Hmm.
some days, more than just a couple, like,
Yeah, yeah.
and then if you get into that culture, at least for me here, then I start to know people that work at the bars, and then bar owners, and then there's free drinks almost flowing like almost all the time, and I'm a sucker for that. So I would just go to have one, and then it would end up being a whole day thing. But then I noticed it was kind of not that I was delusional, but that I was more likely, let's say, to drift into uh, incoherent ideas about myself or my work or other people,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and just kind of put things off and drift without much awareness. Then I noticed when I quit, a bunch of people I know that I drink with, as soon as I quit, I realized like half the people I hang out with when I'm drinking, I don't want to hang out with when I'm not drinking. And that was interesting enough. But a
Yeah.
bunch of the people were like, "Oh man, that's crazy. That's great. I really want to quit too. I just can't figure out how to get off this wave. Like it's just."
That's my reaction, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a problem also when people have a lot of vices. Um, when getting rid of a few can work, but the focus tends to shift on the other ones.
Mhm.
When you only like drink and smoke, um, very difficult to get rid of it. First of all, it ties into how you interact socially,
Mhm.
which is a problem. Like you said, you hang out with these people, but whenever you hang out, you drink. So
Yeah.
now, if you stop drinking, I think Norm Macdonald had a joke about the fact that how great it must be to be the designated driver. He says you don't want to be the sober person among drunk people, and even the people when they get drunk, they start getting offended that you're not drinking with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that, and also cigarettes and alcohol are also closely tied together. As
Yeah.
I remember in the last 5 years or so, I only had, I believe, one beer without smoking.
Mhm.
Right, so they tend to be tied together, and you know, but it's good that you quit. I've lowered the dosage myself, but it's not like I don't think you either are planning on quitting. Never having a drink again, becoming a teetotaler, if I
Yeah.
understood you correctly. But it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's lowering the dosage greatly.
Yeah, exactly. They'll still. I'm sure that the priest at the church will still try to force rakia on me. It's like him and a handful of other guys that are
Yep.
after the liturgy are like, okay, come on, rakia, and he's already pouring it. When you're trying to say
Yeah, yeah,
no.
yeah. Oh god, there's a great skit I would love to send you, but you won't be able to understand it. It's like Montenegrin, and translating it doesn't do it justice. But basically, these two guys are, come on, let's have a drink, and the other guy saying, "Well, no, you don't. I don't want to." And the first one says, "Well, I already poured it, so you can leave it there to stay." Oh, that wouldn't be proper to. In the end, they're both just piss drunk. Which one is this? This is the second one. By God, I've never had more second rakias in my life. but you know, I'll send it to you. Maybe you get something out of it.
Yeah, it'll be fun anyway, and I do understand a decent amount of the language.
Yeah, but
But yeah,
you get all of this Montenegrin zest to it. The way they speak. Ja su panextui. So it's fun to explore, and you took as your namesake, not namesake, but your Saint Basil of Ostrog.
yeah,
So Vasily Ostroshky, as we know him, and he is in Montenegro. So
yeah,
you have to get used to that type of speaking.
yeah. No, it's not bad. I got by okay in Cernagorda for sure. Uh, so yeah, the quitting drinking is interesting. It's I could tell like that it was that I wasn't like in the driver's seat with the decision making, and then it would lead to like the way I would communicate, specifically online. I would tend to be more easily drawn into arguments or like send a nasty message to somebody I was
Yeah, I
talking
become
to.
more agitated, and
Yeah,
to me, drink is like a booster of whatever state I'm in when I start drinking. So if I'm
yeah,
happy, I'll be much more happy. If I'm angry, I'll be much more angry. So I have to be very careful with that. And then my late grandfather, I keep making the joke: if you have like a picture dictionary, like you could put his photo as the definition of a happy drunk. Like he becomes almost a child, and it was an outstanding thing to witness. This
yeah.
big, mustachioed old man, just starts singing and.
Yeah, it can really be fun. I think if I lowered it down, I'm going to quit now for like, I think I made a deal with another guy. So he wanted to quit something as well. So we're both doing it until like the middle of November, I think.
Oh, that's a proper, you know, dedication then. Well, if you plan
Yeah,
on
it's
going to
interesting because I
Nashville,
notice in certain places I go, I know. I actually thought maybe I won't go to the festival because I was thinking it won't really be that fun without drinking, which is also another weird thing. Because I remember when I was a kid, I had fun at live music without drinking at all. I just enjoyed live music, period. But I don't know that I would enjoy the crowd as much as I would. Like I can tolerate crowds a lot easier if I'm drinking. I noticed that as well.
well, it's a jazz festival, so I think I'd start fighting people without drinking because jazz is of the devil. I did go one year, so
Really?
so that's it's not the usual jazz. It's more modern, but it's fun. You have all sorts of things to do around it. I remember when I went, they brought an old timey projector and played black and white films, like proper black and white films, not like modern, but made it with the type of technology, silent ones as well. So it was interesting,
Yeah.
and all sorts of things you can do around it. So I don't know. You're the one who has to deal with it.
Well, I'm coming to visit you and the priest and the priest I met in Vienna, and then also just to uh, maybe go to Pirot again, get to the mountains a
Hmm.
little bit, and then visit the monasteries or something like this, but
Yep.
something relaxed.
I don't know if you know this, but in Vojvodina, which is pretty close to you,
Yeah.
and then also on the side of Vojvodina that is close to you, there's literally two hills in Vojvodina. It's extremely flat, the Pannonian flatlands. But so you've got in the east, you've got one called Breg, which just means hill. See, there's so
Mhm.
many hills you can call one of them hill.
Yeah.
But the other is called Fruška Gora.
Oh, I've heard of
Um,
that. Yeah.
yeah, so and there are tons of monasteries there. So if you ever want to go somewhere close and get a lot of bang for your buck, as you Americans say, that's a good choice.
Yeah. Have you been out there?
No,
Oh.
I hate traveling. I hate everything basically, uh, but no, I haven't. The only reason I would travel is to visit monasteries and stuff.
Yeah.
I know I'll have to make compromises once I get married, but that's something. Sacrifices are good in that regard.
Yeah.
Otherwise, no. It's like I can look at the pictures. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So some of the stuff I wanted to get into, and we can kind of pick whatever we want here, but I wanted to this all ties together because the the work that I do the with people, the core of that is just this body movement and breathing thing. And even as soon as I say that, I know just because of the type of people like Jim Bob reviews, and the stuff
Yeah,
that's
sounds
in that
very new
milieu that
agey.
that I get forced into that in people's mind, not everybody's mind, but in a lot of people's minds, I'm working in that milieu. Uh, I even run into some challenges with describing it without people running off into some fantasy land about what it is. Uh, but it's important to note the name of it is undoing. And what I'm kind of getting at here is, like I said, so many clients, so many people I worked with. This is how I ended up focused on orthodoxy as well, was because a bunch of clients found orthodoxy at different times in different parts of the world after we worked together. And one guy that's pretty deep into orthodoxy now is really living the life in a fascinating way. In U.S., Northeast U.S., he and I were discussing how this might be. And I remember when I trained in this stuff, I learned it from a guy who was formerly deep in the occult world. And he was also a psychologist, and he kind of rescued the work out of the hands of psychiatry. That's how he saw it. So prior to that, you had to be a psychiatrist to be able to even learn this stuff. But then psychiatry kind of bans this type of work anyway because it's based on the body. It doesn't lead to any drugging. And the philosophy is counter to the way psychiatry generally operates. So it was trapped in there. He removed it from there, and then I saw that he was still using occult language and framing to frame the work, which then gives it a completely different, let's say, the practitioner, totally different mindset, which can be completely delusional. And the interesting thing is, most of those people never actually tried any of that stuff because it wasn't based in some kind of fantasy or ritual or practice of that nature. But then I removed all that language from it, removed any of those ideas from the presentation, and used only basic English and physical terminology that anyone could experience themselves, with the premise not being for healing, not being for therapy, not being for psychology, not even being to make you better, but to get people out of this fantasy land of words and ideas and abstractions that they're living trapped within, that's not grounded anywhere. And then back to their body, back to an awareness of what's actually happening, and have the ability to discern the difference between the two, to tell when they're lost in ideas versus aware and present in actuality, and to not react anymore, to stop overreacting to the contents of the mind. And from there, that tended to people started getting curious about the truth and noticing where their own ideas or worldviews were ungrounded. So one guy called it activating his internal bullshit detector. And then he just found his way like rapidly through all that material, rejected the New Age and the occult stuff, and then also found Christ in Orthodoxy.
Right. So on that last point that you made, people, when they start realizing that a certain way of thinking that they, I wouldn't even say that they had, because I don't think a way of thinking is something you have, and I'll get to this in my second point. It's lived. You live it out. Sort of like in my yesterday's stream, I talked about how faith, the opposite of faith, is infidelity, and everyone knows that infidelity isn't merely a mental assent to a set of propositions. However, as I was saying, the way of thinking, you live it out. It plays out in the real world, whether you like it or not. And credit to Jordan Peterson, which is not a very particularly common thing to happen. He says saying you believe in God is not enough. There has to be something done about it, because especially if you say you believe in a particular type of God, a personal God, the God of the Bible, even like Allah or some other entity that has a personality, that has will, and not just what I like to call this deity that used to swat away the difficulties of trying to justify materialism and trying to justify cosmogenesis and abiogenesis and all of these. How can these complex systems arise out of nothing or out of chaos? But when that system gets challenged, they can double down, which can only work for a while, or sometimes they completely lose it. They go absolutely mad because now their system is broken and they get lost. But to my second point, there's always an underlying Manichaean Gnosticism in Protestant thinking, which I think has developed into what we would call secular culture that we inhabit today. Even though I might be in an Orthodox country or in a majority Catholic country, it doesn't matter, because the education system still tends to get us into that frame of thinking.
Yeah.
So you are sort of having this idea that you have the mind, and then we as Christians might recognize that as soul, spirit, or something. But then you've got the body, and these are somehow disjunct. These are sort of misaligned or something. It's not that simple. And then if you still, even as a secularist, have the idea of mind and then body, it's still somehow separate, even though they would say that the mind is a product of the body. It is still a phenomenon that you can treat differently. But as Christians, we would reject that you have body, soul, and spirit as these parts that sort of click together. Yeah. That's not true. That's not how we see things. We see them as parts you can describe, but as much as my finger is not my finger, if you chop it off, I can only, then treat it as property, perhaps, but it's not my finger anymore. Likewise, it is a horrible thing and it produces horrible ways of thinking, that people go for this idea of you can neglect the body, you can ignore the body, which is not something we see in Orthodox worship. Making the sign of the cross, bowing, prostration, kissing icons, etc. These are all very physical, and that's a good thing, because you're supposed to be worshiping with your entire being. It's not that, we have this. This is very Platonic, actually. This idea that the body is this prison for the soul. You just want to get rid of it so you can be pure.
No.
That is not Christian, and that is why I think you and people who share your worldview, it is absolutely fine to then provide this third way, not particularly De Gaullean third way, but this third way of not trying to say, oh, you need to just go to the gym or you just need to meditate or something, because you are also your body, you are your soul, you are your spirit. And if you are trying to fix things, you can't just focus on one thing. It won't work. They bleed into each other.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And the struggle with framing it, well, what's interesting, it's probably okay that people encounter this who are seekers. I was looking at the book Christ the Eternal Tao, and it's an Orthodox
Iron Monk,
publication.
Damascene.
Yes, exactly. And it's drawing on a lot of Seraphim Rose material, as far as I understand. Some of his translations or work with the Tao and this kind of stuff. But it was fascinating to see. They were saying that earnest seekers after truth prior to historical appearance or physical appearance of Christ on the earth still had an awareness of him, or of his eternality and of his existence.
Yes.
And they could point to it, but that it was, and it wasn't inverted, but it was just clouded, or it was not, they couldn't completely discern it.
Yes. So in the West, they would somewhat have this dichotomy almost of natural versus special revelation, right? So they would say, oh, because they had natural law and, the ability to discern things in nature, they could get somewhere, but they lacked that special revelation. Whereas, as Orthodox, we wouldn't make that strong distinction between the two, but definitely, as you mentioned, Lao Tzu, with the idea of the Tao, but also with the Greeks, the idea of the Logos went pretty far. We wouldn't say that they got it right, or be like someone like E. Michael Jones, who basically said they did. And but they got to the place where they should have gotten to, but it ended up just not being able to name it properly.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting now, I'm thinking about all the what I call fake spirituality, or all these new age kind of quests and healing and trauma and going to the psychiatrist or the psychologist, and because people have been taught to define themselves in those ways, and they feel that something's wrong, which is interesting because what I'm guessing is they're experiencing their own fallen nature, or the fallen nature of humanity. That's what the sense of wrongness must be pointing at, and yet it's inverted in those worlds, and then it's treated as though it's either, in psychiatry, then it's a chemical imbalance, which has never been actually demonstrated. And it's a weird false proposition to begin with. But people that then go on to this healing quest or this therapy kind of journey, or going to all the festivals and trying to, or raise consciousness and all this kind of stuff, I think that well, number one, most of them have been involved first in some form of Protestantism or Catholicism that left them feeling like totally disillusioned from Christianity in general.
Yes.
I've seen so many people that way. And then when I occasionally will mention, if the person's open to it or the conversation leads in that direction, I'll mention, go check out an Orthodox liturgy, or go talk to whoever, some monk or priest or whatever, and I think you'll have an interesting time. And when I explain some of the basic differences and mention about the guilt and shame aspect, people are just blown away. They've never encountered Christianity that's not something that that's triggering the demon of rebellion, let's say. It gets very active.
Yes. Unfortunately, historically speaking, Catholicism went down this road of the focus stopped being the resurrection and started being the crucifixion, right? And all sorts of things started focusing so much on guilt. You know, oh, look at what God was willing to sacrifice for you and suffer for you. And look at you doing all of these nasty things. That's one thing. And then in Protestantism, of course, it breaks into 1,000 pieces. You know, all the way from, oh, you lack the signs of pre-election or something, and etc. But unless you have the full context, which is available in Orthodoxy, you start seeing all the false dichotomies, right? You stop seeing things like what I emphasize also in my streams and on Jim Bob's streams. There is no good outside of God, right? We participate either with him or with the demons. Right. It's not that all of a sudden we have this subconsciousness, right? We've imported that. No one knows what it is, but it doesn't matter because it sounds scientific and not woo religious.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely religious. However, so now you're this independent actor, and therefore guilt and shame and stuff accrue with you because either evolution instilled it in you, you know, they would say, you know, guided, theistic evolution, or in whatever manner God created you, you know, he made you feel this sense of shame, so it just triggers a certain mechanism within you. Whereas we believe that you are devolving from your purpose, devolving from your what your nature was supposed to be by participating in the demonic.
Yeah.
And again, because there's no neutral ground, and because all good anywhere in reality that any human being does, it comes from God. And then you have to explain to them why we don't have this, living annihilationism, this complete monergism, where God literally puppeteers you, or he sort of sets things up in this temporal sense. It's much more complex than that because he's transcendent. But you either participate with him or, with the demons. That is how you form yourself. And it's a journey, it's a process that you keep developing more and more. And of course, there can never be a proximity to God so great that there can't be more of a proximity. This is why the eschaton is, we envision it the way we do. Because your purpose is theosis. Your purpose is to grow, to be more like God by doing his works, by participating in his grace and love and mercy and everything.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and that's really the missing piece to these to people's healing quest and all this kind of stuff. That's at the root of it, is this sense of disconnect from God. And I was listening to Cosmas, the Hierom monk in Australia, and he's a fascinating guy, by the way. He did a bunch of he really went on the offensive during the big virus thing over the last few years. He was even having to confront aspects of the church, bishops and things who were pushing forced medication and this kind of stuff. And he was calling heresy on various aspects of it.
And it was in Australia, and they went absolutely mad. I was shocked, and I'm not an optimistic person, but like flying helicopters out into the countryside. Whom are they going to? Whatever bloody animal they could have. It's more dangerous to go out in Australia on the best of days, because everything wants to kill you and can very easily, than during the bloody Black Plague, let alone COVID.
Yeah, exactly. But Cosmas was mentioning, I was listening to talks about marriage and children and this kind of stuff. And he was talking about how dating didn't exist even the concept of dating didn't exist until like the time of cars, basically. That prior
Yes.
to that, it was like a whole different thing, and that people are messed
I
up
mean,
because
just
they're,
imagine how that would work out logistically.
yeah,
If you had to go on a cart or on horseback, like, how do you think it would work? Like, it would take you, days to have a date, which now is, just very easy. And we're talking about minimal provisions. We're talking about, because you didn't just not have cars, you lacked mass transportation outside of, the locomotive, and transport by water.
yeah.
So we take it all for granted, that, and you can continue your point. I'm just saying it's
No,
it's
this is good.
one of those things that is so easy to miss, that we just think, oh, what, you've got a car, but no, you don't just have a car. You need to have it readily available, affordable for the people, not just for a couple of the elites,
Yeah,
but also then to imagine, just what you would consider a 1 hour drive would have taken days,
yeah,
unless you were like a messenger. Romans were great at that, building, these long roads, and then you have a horseman going, as fast as he can on a horse, and then they try to organize things in a way where you had stables along the road so he can get a fresh horse and just continue riding.
yeah,
Right? That's not going to work on a night out. I
yeah,
promise you.
yeah, exactly. And so and I'm sure there's many other aspects of the culture that are like that, where they're now taken for granted, like dating, and there's so much uh, such an industry built around people learning how to do dating and what to say and how to interact with people. And people are even taught to date someone who they would never consider marrying. And Cosmos was mentioning that this is doing damage to people and the way they perceive the opposite sex, the way they perceive themselves. And then they generate a whole industry of illnesses based around this, like social anxiety and all these disorders that you just would never have come up. And that he said the core of all this is that people are brought up on television or with parents who don't know how to behave in society and around other people and how to live properly. And so then kids learn this from television, and then they've imported an entire worldview and way of behaving, way of feeling and reacting to the world and to other people that's essentially sick and not normal at all. It's not how we're made to live. And then when they go to seek answers, the answers are just kind of trying to. Mostly, it's cognitive approaches. Number one, it's just
Yeah.
think differently or feel better somehow, and then trying to fit them back into that improper way of living, so it
Yes.
flows somewhat more smoothly on certain metrics, like making enough money, keeping your place, not wanting to kill yourself, not harming other people,
Yes.
basically.
But that's the thing, and there is no easy solution to it. I hate people who want to provide easy solutions,
Yeah. I don't
because
see one.
we are just going to go back to arranged marriages. Well, I'm afraid the generation that, in the West at least, even here, of course, uh, the generation of people who could do that is just gone.
Yeah.
It's been too long of a time since we've had this type of thing, and it's not like you're going to be fine now. Arranged marriages didn't work uh, as well as they did in the same circumstances, because now we have cars. Actually, now
Yeah.
you can go to 3 towns over within a couple of hours, and try to do some unseemly things. Back then, that was really an option. So we
Yeah.
are dealing with a completely different set of circumstances. Um, but as you said, the dating thing, um, I mean, we see everyone from pickup artists, um, to I don't know what the feminist equivalent would be, but all of these people have built around not just what you were mentioning, the industry that is more tied in with psychology and the pharmaceutical aspects of it. But also we have people like Andrew Tate, right, and his brother, and you can see, like, I can't even describe how disgusting it is when one of them, I can't remember which one, had a lecture on how to date a virgin so you can take her virginity and then dump her.
Man.
Right?
Yeah.
And because it speaks to a very carnal part of us, you sort of, it's very easy to fall into. Especially when you don't have this giant construct of religious, teachings around you. It's all just, oh, it's evolution, and evolutionarily every man wants to blah 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 blah, right? Just ego trips, basically, and coping should you fail. But it's so foul. And what do you expect? How do you expect that girl to then fare later on?
Yeah.
And then what I see happening now is you get either, right, like women are all whores who want to destroy you and take your money, and on the other side is men just want to beat and rape women.
Yeah.
Right? Why? Because no one wants to accept the fault on the side of their sex or gender. And it's all pride. It's all, the fuel is pride. Right? Because if you have these men who use women, like, what do you expect the women to be like? But you also have very predatory women. It's just that predation isn't that overt, that physical. It's much more psychological. It's much more surreptitious and sneaky. And then because everyone just wants to point fingers, then the sides get trenched in, and then you can't even have dating, because people will start seeing dates as basically, and they do pretty much, as how to, have sex, not as in trying to establish a relationship, because they will justify it by saying, oh yeah, I don't want to get married. Do you see what happens to men who get married, right? And then women have had, for even a longer time, the idea, oh, it's just a patriarchal structure, meant to subjugate you and keep you barefoot and pregnant and whatnot.
Yeah.
So yes.
Yeah, and it's not, and marriage isn't even put in its proper place either. When you have the world of dating, and there's a premise that people believe that they need to get to know someone for a long time. Now, you should know the person you're going to marry. You don't just go totally blind into it. But living with someone and being around them and having shared interests isn't really the foundation for what marriage is about.
Yes. As Christians, we of course believe that. But also, what's much worse is that you need to get to know yourself, Garrett. That's the problem. Women have been sold these things like, oh, you need to discover who you really are,
Right.
And especially with middle class women, this goes completely haywire. Right? Oh, I've been married and I have children, but I'm not sure if this is like really who I am. This rubbish. You go and try and have multiple partners. Right? By the way, none of this will work because there is no essence of you that you can reach. This nonsense again. That's very pagan. Actually, more new agey than pagan. So a pagan in a different sense. It's you have an unachievable goal, and then all of these loops to bring you back on the same path. And everywhere in between, there are people trying to make money off it. So it's not just a vicious circle; it's a series of vicious circles.
Yeah, all like a vicious spiral. It's it's terrifying in some ways to try to comprehend it. But the interesting thing is the solutions. Well, first I want to mention this: that I think that the notion of a secular culture is also something that's pretty new. I don't think there was. I don't think there were secular cultures.
The concept of secular and sacred comes from Saint Augustine, right?
Really,
Never to be used in the manner we use it today, right? So the words have gained new meanings because they were never supposed to be separate. They are supposed to be separate in the sense that you have your secular authorities and then you've got your sacred authorities.
yeah.
And these are not one thing. So much like if you go to a hospital, there's this ward and this other ward. It's still a hospital, but you can also see how they're parts, we can say, of the same thing. This is the Orthodox teaching of Sinfonia between the church and state. It's what the two-headed eagle is all about. But it has developed into this idea of separation of church and state, right? And the reason you get that is, first of all, in Catholicism, you had to have confessional states, right? And they all had to accept that the Pope can decide to, shoo them away. Ironically enough, when you have the Holy Roman Empire, because it's actually more less centralized, right? The nobles had a lot more influence than in, let's say, France, where it was much more centered around the king. The Pope can just threaten you or excommunicate the emperor, and all the nobles would see that as an opportunity to take him down and seize more power for themselves. Whereas in France, if the Pope threatens to excommunicate the king, actually the nobles were much more likely to say, what does this guy in Italy want to do with us? He can sort straight off. That's why, in fact, the First Vatican Council, tries to deal with this problem of Gallicanism, right? This French notion that, sort of foreigners. But I'm saying this is why you would have the impulse there, because whatever you try to do, there's this guy in Italy who can basically throw you away and possibly throw your entire kingdom or empire into a civil war, which is not ideal.
Yeah.
But also, then you get Protestantism, and Protestantism, you can get the Anglican variety, where you get an Anglican, monarchy starts persecuting the Catholics, then you get a Catholic monarch who starts persecuting the Anglicans, and everyone's persecuting the Puritans, which is a good thing, because we see what happens when Puritans gain power. But then you start getting all of these fractures, and what are you going to do with it? It's going to be eternal, sectarian war, unless you just chase them away from positions of power and influence outside of just merely, preaching and trying to garner, support from the people, and then, the leaders in essence, or I mean, in theory, should work. But that's why you get the separation of church and state as a concept that's necessary. Why? Because they don't have proper ecclesiology. They just don't. It's not the job of any bishop to start commanding, nobles and royals around. Never was. But because of that, again, like Protestantism is reacting to legitimate, problems in Rome, but then the solution is worse than the problem.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you could be you can't really bring that together unless you return to proper Christian ecclesiology. And since Silver Pie asks, would Byzantium be the only example of holy and secular authorities working hand in hand? First of all, you have tensions there. You had plenty of them. You had, bishops and even ones we recognize as saints, being persecuted by the crown. It's just that it was still no need to separate it. You have them working hand in hand as it should be, but you also had that in Russia, you had that in Bulgaria, you had that in Serbia, in all sorts of Orthodox places. Byzantium has this, glory about it. It's this just gorgeous, late Roman Empire. There's lots of aesthetics to it, just endless amounts of incredible saints produced and things. So people focus on it, and then the second one they might focus on is Russia because it's massive. But the principle is at play anywhere, right? So it's because you have horrible ecclesiology that you produce these solutions. And all of this to say, this is why you get the idea of a secular culture, because now you don't have a unifying religious culture. It's simply not an existent thing. And for places like America, the only alternative to having a secular culture is just sectarian violence, also ethnic violence, etc., that could arise from these tensions. So it's a necessity born out of improper theology and ecclesiology.
And so how does, for example, Orthodoxy handle, so if dating, and Cosmas is he pulls no punches. That's it took me a while to actually be able to listen to him, because I noticed at first it was kind of repelling me. There was too much to take on, and now I really appreciate it. It feels like I can advance faster in my understanding of a lot of topics. He's not harsh, but he knows that he's being sharp with what he's saying. He's trying to wake people up to what's going on. And but so how did Orthodoxy approach something like? So you don't do dating in the typical sense. I know what my answer would be, but as far as like finding a wife or answering the question, because as single men, we're generally pushed to either go to the monastery or to get married. Although I heard Cosmas saying you can't, it's not even like it's a decision you make on your own cognitively, like you're choosing between two options.
Yep.
But it's more because he was advising, he mentioned a bunch of different people. He advised them not to get married until they worked on themselves. And he didn't mean in some new age sense, but he meant advancing spiritually and handling their vices and handling their temptations and tendencies.
If you are broken to a sufficient degree, we are all to a certain, but to a sufficient degree, you're not going to be a good husband nor a good father. Like some problems are solved. We talked about at the beginning of the stream with drinking. People who have just stopped drinking after they had a child, all of a sudden things like, oh wow, I need to take care of this little thing. Screw the bottle. Likewise, if you just don't work on yourself, which is a constant, commandment in Orthodoxy. Always work on yourself. Always try to become more Christ-like. And then you get married, but that's going to only exacerbate things. You think, oh, I'll get a wife, and then things will start, falling into place. But you don't. You're expecting it to happen to you instead of, giving effort. The long suffering. The sacrifice of your own appetites and etc. And then turns out you're now a bad husband. So now you've got a wife who's probably pretty miffed about you being the way you are. So now these tensions rise, and now your problems get worse. So yes, but when you talk about dating, unfortunately, there is no alternative to it. Getting to know a girl, but like cohabitation is an absolute no. Another one that's a no is premarital sex. Uh, but getting to know someone can be a very wholesome thing. So in that sense, dating can be incredibly wholesome and nice. So we have to avoid secular culture being our guideline. And so again, I don't know, like the priest is not going to arrange a marriage for you, except the ceremony part. He can help you there. He can help you with spiritual advice, but he's not just going to go look around the parish to find you a wife. And then, you get to meet and, well, see you next Sunday, after Lent, we can have a ceremony, so I don't know. Have you heard any advice more particular than that?
What I kind of grasp is to like with Jesse Lee, to his credit, I don't even know where to put him as far as his theology, but because it's not any traditional Protestant kind of thing.
He's a Unitarian, so
is he Unitarian?
Yeah.
Okay, by default, I suppose. I did learn a lot from him, to his credit. But he mentioned something like and this was similar to Cosmos, was to seek God and His righteousness, and to work on that, to make that your complete focus, and then that everything else will be added to you, including the wife, and that it will be fairly obvious when she shows up.
Right, and you pray also. Pray for guidance, because as St. Paul says, everyone has a gift, right? And as far as the church is concerned, it's not good to be a bachelor.
Yeah.
Not just the eternal bachelor, but the regular one as well. I always think of Lindsey Graham when I say that phrase. But you have, it's a selfish thing, because you're supposed to be participating in the life of the church, and marriage is a sacrament of the church. So is bringing up children into the church by means of baptism, and chrismation, and all of these. These are things you're called to do. So rushing it would be an error. Just, okay, I guess this is my duty on paper, so I need to check this marriage, thing off of my chores. But no, you need to work heavily on yourself and pray for guidance, because God is more than willing to answer our prayers. And just yesterday or 2 days ago, I saw a quote of Saint Isaac the Syrian, who said, if you pray to God for something and He doesn't answer your prayer immediately, do not get angry, because certainly God is more wise than you are. He knows why He's delaying. But keep that in mind. Maybe people really underestimate how difficult it is to be a monastic. They sort of think, oh, you just sort of walk around the monastery, go to church every so often. No. It is a life of complete submission to the abbot, and that's what you're choosing. No more, I guess I'll go and read this, play a bit of video games. No. If he tells you, stab a stick into the ground and water it every day, you do that. That's what Father Stephen DeYoung said. I love that example. You can say, well, what was going to happen? Doesn't matter. That's not your decision anymore. You've chosen the monastic path. If he says that, that's what you do. Obedience is the highest virtue for monastics.
And what's the difference as well between the monastic life and then the ascetic, like the desert monks, this kind of thing?
Well, technically none.
Well, the reason I thought of it is in that same Cosmos thing, he was saying that people who are married shouldn't be reading a ton of books about the monastic life or the ascetic life.
Yes.
They should be reading texts about marriage and relationship through orthodoxy.
Yes.
And then that monastics shouldn't be studying about marriage or studying about the desert form of monasticism. They should be focused on, I guess this must be the differentiation between the collective kind of monastic experience, or city, or let's say where they're living with each other versus the solo ascetic.
Well, here's the basic thing, right? Monasticism, the word itself comes from Greek mone, which means alone.
Okay.
So to be a monk is to be alone. But when you have someone like Saint, Anthony the Great, he starts living in the desert, but not just like out in the desert, but in an old abandoned Roman fort, right? So when you talk about monastics, where do they live? In monastic cells, right? It's a cell. It's this one single unit thing, right? So monastics do live, in a sense, they live in a community, but they're supposed to be apart, focus on their both their duties, very practical ones. One of them will probably be the cook. The other one will, maybe he's talented with woodworking, so that is what he'll focus on, right? But that's all up to the abbot to decide.
Yeah.
The ones then who go out into the desert, or if you lack a desert, probably the forest, the mountain,
or a
something.
cave or something. Yeah.
Yes. That is something you need a blessing for, right? I can't, nor can you. I can't just decide, okay, I'm going to go into the forest.
Just
no.
Yeah.
First of all, there might be some who are called to that, but they are, fewer monastics. Much fewer would be those of such an ability to do that, because you need it to also be profitable for your soul. But that's why you have a spiritual father, and for the monastics, that's the abbot of the monastery. So if you get a blessing, then you can start undergoing, more extreme forms of asceticism. But only when your abbot blesses you for such a journey, because they can end very poorly. I mean, people go into monasticism and fail, and it can be very dangerous for the soul. This is why you spend so much time as just a novice. You're just there, participate every so often, etc. They won't even have you be part of the brotherhood yet. But it's just that people who receive a blessing for a particular level of asceticism, right? We don't have monastic orders in Orthodoxy. It makes no sense to have monastic orders in Christianity, which we see a lot of in Catholicism, for example. And there's this song I really like. It's sung by two nuns, and one of them is playing this very strange instrument, but a lovely one. And I notice on the, it's not I don't know what the robe is called exactly. And then I noticed there's like a little paw print, like a animal's paw. And I could only assume, oh God, it's not like a pendant or something. It's part of the thing. It's like, oh God, it's some order for helping animals or something. But that's not what monasticism is about. It's literally pursuing the angelic life, not pursuing, we have this social thing to take care of. Even though monasteries historically, even in Orthodoxy, they were the hospitals of the day and the schools and dealing with orphans and whatnot. But it's not the order of helping the cute little orphans.
Yeah.
Right. You're a monastic, and part of your duties is, taking care of those in need. It's not an order. It's not a special thing you can just choose to do. And even should you try to do such things, you would need the blessing of the abbot, and it would be you. It wouldn't be a new organization.
Yeah.
It's completely improper for monastics to try and do things like that. Start movements.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, what? How do you handle that issue as a bachelor, personally? Like, where?
Um, well, to be honest, it's challenging because I'm extremely asexual. You have no idea. um, I don't hide it, but I also, you try to meet someone, you try to be. I don't have a problem, even finding someone interested. It's just that I struggle with my personality fitting with anyone. And not just I'm not willing to give up things, but for example, I remember being with this girl and she said, I don't want children. What are you going to do after that? Like
Yeah.
nothing. There is no good way to proceed from that. Neither me not having children because she doesn't want any, nor me trying to force her or manipulate her, emotionally,
Yeah.
with emotional blackmail or something. And then I can't say I'm dealing with it well, but God willing, it will be resolved in some manner. I have to say, as someone who thought he would go into monasticism, I'm starting to realize that I miss a lot of the qualities that would be necessary to be a good monk. So I focus on that aspect of Christian life.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I sometimes feel pulled in that direction, but I'm not sure if I am certain that I have some amount of, what do you call it? Where you glorify the idea, but that it's like people who think
Yeah,
like being a cop
yeah.
is going to be some like adventure movie, and then it's like mostly
Yep.
paperwork or something. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And then you fail at certain cases. Then you see a lot of mangled bodies, and turns out not so fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, that maybe I have fantasies about the monastic life, and especially from reading, lives of certain monks and saints that are the further back in time, probably the more fantastical it would be to expect that type of experience.
You're like walking through the forest. The birds are singing, and you're silently praying, and then you kneel in this little, grove. Turns out, no.
And I don't doubt that kind of stuff happens. I suppose, I think monks are having revelation and for lack of a better word, mystical experiences. And I've read about many of them, but yeah, I know that a lot of that skips
happens
over
after a lot of struggle.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that skips over those stories that are just trying to tell the greatest hits of some saint. They're not talking about they'll make statements like, and after 15 years of serving this head of the monastery, then they'll make leaps in the story like that.
Yeah, and then it seems to you like, oh, what's 15 years? I'm so and so old. Well, yes, 15 years in the past is not a long time at all. In the future, it's a lot of time. But the process for electing bishops is that they have to be monastics. But in order to be not just any monastic, but you need to be an abbot, and specifically, not necessarily, but almost exclusively an archimandrite, so someone who's in charge of a major monastery or multiple smaller ones, right? But in order to become an abbot, you have to be a monk for quite a number of years, and to be a monk, you need to be a novice for a couple of years. So, including with bishops, you need also a degree, but so you have years of just being a novice, just trying to get into it, and then years and years of pure service, and then years and years of trying to lead a monastery or a couple until you get to the position of the bishop, right? But when you read the life of a certain bishop, you go, oh, he was in this monastery, he spent as a novice, but then he was transferred to this bigger monastery because he showed himself great, right? And it just sounds like it's like a film. You watch it for a couple of hours at best, and then all of a sudden there you go, guy with long white beard. But he didn't start off like that.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of room to fall and stumble and dangerously in the entire process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. I do enjoy visiting the monasteries, and again, I know that's not the same as living the monastic life. The bishop here, he's super young. The bishop in this that I don't know the specific region, but the one that's our bishop for the church here in Osijek, I guess he must cover Vukovar and stuff too. I'm not sure, but he's like in his 30s, I believe. They were commenting that is.
Yeah, definitely. I actually don't know. I know the current patriarch was there as well, but you can get to that position, especially if you show great aptitude. We also had a pretty small pool of during the communist period. Not a lot of choices. So you had a lot of people who would have joined the monastic orders, just didn't, because under communism, might as well condemn yourself to persecution of one type or another. So you have to also bear that in mind. Like we had the Metropolitan Amphilochius, in Montenegro, right? But when communism fell, it was him and about 8 priests for Montenegro. Right, so you're going to need a lot of time to then produce this new crop, where you have a lot of choice between, the white beards and the gray beards, so that all the young people can study under them and stuff. So you also have to bear that in mind. Demographically speaking, if you're in your 40s, you were born in. At the latest, in the 70s, right? So you had this period of communism. Communism fell by the time you would have gone to a monastery or something, which wasn't an option if you were born in the 60s and 50s. It would have been much later. You had monasteries with 1 or 2 monks or nuns in total, just because the communists would have you would have to, register to visit a monastery, and that basically means good luck ever finding a job again. You can have end up in Goliotok or somewhere. So things were dire, but now you need this new crop, and I don't know. It's not easy to deal with it, but God willing, we'll pull through. The young ones tend to actually be quite stringent. A lot of the older ones were, sort of, broken, very tired of dealing, with all types of persecutions and beatings and people spitting on them and things like that. It really can do a number on you. So render you rather cynical. But the young, both priests and people in higher positions of the clerical order tend to be pretty solid.
Yeah, it's totally fascinating how it all fits together.
I want to believe it or not, God knows what He's doing.
yeah, exactly. Otherwise, then what? If not, yeah. I was thinking of the role of awareness and attention, and how that shifted for me just after the baptism, and knowing that I'll be doing confession. It changed the way that is related to why I quit drinking, because I realized I was not in control of this touches on a more true definition of freedom too, but I realized I was not in control of how I was thinking and how I was acting toward other people. In this seemingly small ways, but I saw how that could really snowball. But just like I said, sending a nasty message to somebody or making a comment that was like demeaning for no real purpose, and seeing a chain of those kinds of things, and then realizing, oh well, I if I don't have the freedom to not do those things, then I'm a slave to something. I'm a slave to the alcohol and whatever influences it's opening me up to. But then I realized, well, I have the freedom to not actually do that. Then I do have the freedom to not drink, and that's easier than trying to drink and the amount I was drinking and manage this other thing. So it was like it made the answer was very simple. I don't have to get like my personality adjusted. I don't have to go to a psychologist and say, why am I acting like this for people when I'm under demonic influence?
Whom can I blame
drinking, you know?
for acting this way?
Yeah.
Wasn't it? I believe you told me that when you started your first Lent, you got offered free pizza.
The first day, yeah.
First day, yeah. I told you I had a similar experience. So yeah, that's something that really jumps out at you. I remember being warned, when you start, and it was like do you call it a water fast? We call it post novody, which literally means like Lent on water, which sounds like you only drink water, but no, it's to differentiate it from being able to use oil, right? So you can't have your chips. You have to go with boiled potatoes, I'm afraid. But I remember, it was that, and this wasn't a priest. This was a person teaching us, religious studies in school, Orthodox studies, but we call it veronauka. It's an elective thing to go to, and the instructor of our group, he said, remember, the one thing I could never forget is he said, food will start smelling better for you, right? And I was like, okay, listen, I already believe in Christianity. You don't have to go and give me these little, almost esoteric, little tidbits like, oh, food will start smelling, because the demons want to tempt you. Turns out, oh God, like you go past a bakery or something, and it just overwhelms you. And it's the first day, there are people who will tell you if you eat very spicy food, you tend to overload the system, and then, you always need tons of spices on everything, otherwise it tastes bland. But it's like the first day, I haven't yet given up on like for some time for my taste to be adjusted or anything, to start craving things. It's the next day. So, and then you tend to meet members of the opposite sex who are all of a sudden very interested in you.
Oh yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing in a negative sense, but the struggles God sends us are so that we may grow. So yeah, the struggle is good.
That's the interesting thing. When I was talking with Nemanja in Vienna, he was defining freedom to this atheist guy. I was just listening to the conversation, and it was fascinating. And he kept asking, he asked the guy, like, what do you believe in? And he said, oh, I believe in love, so I don't need a religion. And he's like, what's love? Where does this come from? And he's like, well, it's a feeling. And he's like, so you just believe in a feeling? Like, where does that feeling come from? Like, who created that? And then he said, well, I'm interested in freedom. And he said, okay, what is freedom? And the guy started trying to explain. He couldn't really get anywhere with it. And then the priest explained, he's like, well, if I feel like I want to just eat I can eat anything I want, and I have all these cravings, and I know that it's bad for me to do this. He said the true freedom is that I don't have to do it. I can actually choose the right thing. And no matter what my passions are saying, no matter what my mind is saying, no matter what the emotions or the temptations are, that I can actually choose to do the good thing anyway. And that made a lot of sense to me. I just don't. There, what is freedom without that? It would just be
Yes.
hedonism.
And that's also St. Augustine. A man has as many masters as he does. I don't believe he said passions, but vices.
Uh-huh.
Right. So you can be a slave to your passions. You look at the homeless people, doing intravenous drugs. Oh, look at the freedom on this guy. It just doesn't work. It's just not how God made us. You can choose that type of thing, but it's almost, I don't know. It's almost that people just want to have the options. It's like a buffet or something.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a buffet, you believe you have freedom, but the thing is, you're not going to get to everything on the buffet, and you want everything on the buffet, so you overeat, and then you get sick. So that's sort of what this type of freedom that he might have been thinking of, where you don't have, evil church people telling you, no, you can't have, a threesome. And it's just that people try to get to a place where it's self-evident or obvious what you should do, right? And I talked about this on Jim Bob's streams. Like, it's always to get to a point where you say, do I really need to tell you why X is wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you ask, why is murder wrong? Do I really need to tell you why murder is wrong? Yeah, you do, actually. Because what you're going to derive it from? Evolution? Evolution is about being nice to people. Have you
Yeah.
read any of the theory and what is necessary to produce evolution? It's always, death, violence, subjugation. That's how you get to the top of a hierarchy and, propagate your genes, etc. So you're not going to get it from evolution. But in any type of inquiry, any path you try to follow, it's just to get you to a place where currently it's culturally inappropriate to say otherwise. Do I really need to tell you why a trans woman is a woman? Yes. I mean, you can't tell
Yeah.
me what a woman is apparently, but you can tell me what belongs in the category. Well, you're not defining the category, so I didn't care if someone identifies as something that has absolutely no, no, it isn't circumscribed in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, the vagueness. They seek the vagueness. The guy said love.
Yeah.
What is love? We won't sing the song. Right? So you're just supposed to get to the point where it's self-obvious, but turns out it never gets to a point where it's self-obvious. Even with orthodoxy, we don't say God is like this box you put anything in and now you don't have to justify it. No, he is transcendent, but he is a being. He is an entity, an actual entity, and not just a vague concept, which the guy was trying to do like that. Most people today try to do with tolerance, right? Acceptance, etc. It's just supposed to be vague, and then you make exceptions as is your want currently.
Yeah. Let's see, this draconian methods. I don't know if this makes sense or not.
Yes.
Wills, capital.
Why is wills associated with nature and not persons? We use the will very differently than the ancients did. So when you talk about will in the ancient sense, for example, Aristotelian sense, you have a seedling, an acorn. That acorn is going to develop, and its, so to speak, propensity to develop is what you call its will, right? that is what the word will used to mean. Nowadays, we sort of associate will with mental processes. That is why draconian methods, you might think, oh, free will, it means you get to choose things. No, will is this quality of something with a nature to have that nature flesh out, develop, follow its progression. That is what we talk about. That is why we say you have a human will, but we all share a human will. But then we also have the instantiation, right? The mode in which these individuated instantiations of human nature and therefore human will that have these particularities about them, So that is why will is associated with nature and not persons, because we have stopped using it in the same sense that it was used traditionally. And we say God has one will, but three persons for the same exact reason. So, I probably should do a stream on the term will. I suppose that might be useful, but that's as short as I can make it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Archangel Uriel says, "Is anything what a strange thumbnail there?
Self-evident.
Is anything self-evident?"
That's sort of a trap to say something is self-evident.
Yeah.
You can't. David Hume really buggered things for people. I suppose as close as you can get would be laws of logic, but even then, you have to rely on the mind also being self-evident, your ability to perceive and appraise information and stimuli would also have to be self-evident, right? You go into a vicious circle. It's obvious that murder is wrong, is just almost tautological. It just, you can't justify it. It's bad because it's murder, and it's murder, therefore it's bad. Yeah. It's not an actual statement. But then you say, oh, it's obvious that you can have empirical data input and that be reliable. No, you can't actually. You are just assuming it. So people assume things and then mistake it for something being self-evident. All relies on your paradigm, all relies on how your paradigm can account for things, and then how it can interact, right? I mean, we're not rejecting empirical evidence or empirical data, but that doesn't make you an empiricist. An empiricist would have to rely on the self-evidence of the reliability of empirical input. Yeah. So, it's quite a bugger, but it's the problem of classical foundationalism that most people rely on, that we can all agree, right, that you have nature and you interact with nature, you have empirical data, you can process it, and then you have the outputs. That's something we can disagree on. But it just assumes too many things to be reliable, and it just ends up being very surface level. So that's why you get so many incomplete ways of thinking. Like with Protestantism, they have to assume that the scriptures are self-evident and also self-authorizing. The Catholics rely on the magisterium, right, and the papacy, but we see they don't play out the way they're supposed to, were that the case.
Yeah, it's interesting now when I talk with, I know a few atheists here, the younger people that I know here that are in Osijek and in Croatia, who are entertaining enough to talk to or friendly enough to spend a decent amount of time around. are open to these kind of conversations, and I realize they've never generally been questioned or thought on at any depth about where they derive morality from. And these are people who I
Yeah.
would call good people. I mean, not withstanding the fallen nature, but I'm saying they're not out justifying doing breaking the commandments, but not because of the commandments. You know what I mean? But so, and when I ask them, a lot of times they'll say, "Well, from my parents, or from it comes from society, or it comes from." You
But
know,
this is the
sometimes they just
idea.
don't have an answer at all. Yeah.
This is the idea we talked about again on Jim Bob streams. Your actions determine your thoughts much more than your thoughts determine your actions.
Mm-hmm.
You've lived a certain life in a certain environment at a certain, in a certain time and place, where people lived a certain way, and you start imbibing that. But you know, we sort of think you just think things and then do them. But how many times we do things and like, what happened to me? I didn't want that, because it happens to you, right? But if you live, let me give you a very practical example. If you're a doctor, right, like a surgeon, and you go, you're pretty successful, but then you like lose a child. Not your child, but I mean, on the operating table. Right? That's going to affect you. That's experience. That's experience you have to deal with. You're going to have to imbibe, and that's going to affect your thinking now, because your actions, again, not saying you, like this hypothetical surgeon, like killed a child, but failed to save one. That's going to affect you. On a much smaller scale, you drinking will affect you much more so than your thoughts will decide, oh, I'm going to drink right now. No, you have already imbibed a lot of ways of behavior. If you live through a war, that's going to affect how you think. So both things that are just part of your culture, which is why so many people just say, oh, why do I have to justify, not murdering people? Why? Because you already live in such an environment. So your thought process doesn't start to even, contend with these things. Whereas if you lived in certain pagan cultures, killing someone could just be, the way of showing you're the good guy, and the good guy would be the strong guy, the powerful guy who has the blessings of, for example, a god of war, or you can have even a god of brawling or whatever it was. You're showing you're a good person in that manner. It's not a given. It's far from a given. It's just that because you've lived in a certain time and place in a certain way, you think all throughout history people just want to, oh, I wish we could have a constitutional republic, crying about it, waiting for Americans to show up. But it's just not the case. Those people lived in a time where, killing someone is a legitimate retort to an argument. So, and they're going to find you a pansy for not accepting it. And they would tell you, do I really need to explain to you why it's okay to kill someone because you cussed out your mother or something?
Yeah.
They would be confused, but people don't want. They always start with the tabula rasa, the blank slate idea, which is a very Rousseauian way of thinking. But no, you're not a blank slate. There is no Garrett in 18th century America, because you couldn't be there and be you now.
Yeah.
But in a dress differently. No, it wouldn't be you, because all the experiences you've had would simply not have transpired, and therefore would not have formed your personality in such a manner. So you would be a completely different person. Therefore, you wouldn't be the Garrett. You would just have the exact look and let's say the name.
That's something that reminded me about. There's a lot of people who still believe in reincarnation, which I think is
Yeah,
totally coherent when you really sit down to think about it.
yeah, but you are the soul, you see. You are this soul, and this, again, very pagan understanding of the soul, very Platonic in our Western, way of thinking. So that is who you are. So you can pull that out and put it into a rock, or like a bird of some sort, or God forbid, a dog. So we would completely reject that.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the way they try to make it coherent is they're saying the soul, because if you say, well, there's only so many people, and then if they're all being reincarnated, how would the population grow or diminish at all? Like that would be, and then
Yeah,
they would say, okay, yeah, you're becoming an animal or you're becoming some other thing, I suppose.
yeah, because you would also have to say there are people who have tried to wrestle with that, but then they say, oh, a soul can break in pieces and stuff. So
Oh man.
it's literally just coping. But you would have to have, I assume, some level of souls. The Mormons wouldn't have this problem. You just have women giving birth to ghost babies forever. So they don't have a problem with generating new souls. But the problem with the traditional understanding is you don't really account for the fact that we are so over any level of population that it has existed. You know, there's simply no way to understand to defend reincarnation.
Yeah. Well, there's a bunch more stuff I thought we could get to, but I think maybe I'll call it here soon. We've been going a little over an hour and a half.
And Jimbo will be starting in like 15 minutes or so.
Oh, he is. I didn't realize that. Maybe I'll jump on there if there's a panel.
Right,
What is his
I may
topic
too.
tonight?
I'll be doing a stream with him on Friday
Uh-huh.
on his channel. The Aubrey Marcus fellow.
They're going to do a takedown of Aubrey Marcus.
He has been, well, Jimbo has reviewed some of his stuff, but he asked me,
Yeah.
because he had some guy on who discovers the real teaching of Christ.
Ah.
One of those.
I love this. Yeah, yeah.
So we're going to be making fun of idiots. I've really been shocked yesterday. People say the Lent has started. I'm like, wait, what? What Lent? It's not supposed to be this way. And then I always forget like the differences in the calendar, right? So so now when I live stream, I'll just be eating just pure animal fat.
The fatty slanina.
Yeah. I wouldn't even eat the meat part, just the fat, because I have the advantage. Now they can fire back in 2 weeks' time, but until that point.
So that Aubrey Marcus thing. I used to live around a lot of those people in Southern California, and one of the way they gained some ground was material success, and I think the same with like Andrew Tate and these people that some guy was making an argument on one of my Facebook posts about that Andrew Tate is a perfect example for men and for masculinity, and I was like, I really don't think so. And he said even that because if you're to be an elite in society, which to him was the highest good, because you're going to pass down your genetics and your inheritance down, or your wealth down to future generations, and they'll keep doing the same, so that that morality had more to do with breaking the rules in order to get ahead of other people than it did than any sort of sense of good. But then the material success of some of those people then would generate kind of a flock around them. They'd have a mansion and have mansion parties all around some spiritual theme that were like, 5 minutes away from an orgy at any given moment, this kind of situations. And with Tate, yeah, people he speaks with confidence, not necessarily physically, but vocally at least. And people then try to find sense in what he's saying. But if you patch it together, from one interview to the next, it's like completely incoherent.
Right, but
Uh,
people just accept it because they want to make anything that is against the gynocentricity of current culture.
yeah.
So they want it to work. Can't really make it. Like the man is an imbecile.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm
Well,
not
he
saying
claimed to be
that because,
Orthodox while he was pimping out cam girls. You know what I mean? He claimed at some point he
he
said
is Muslim and drinks alcohol. He is anything you want him to be, if it gives him some type of protection, some type of
yeah,
credentials for being a trad in any sense. But the man, and people make compilations of this, like with this Candace Owens interview. He said, "I didn't sell drugs," and someone just posts a video of him on being interviewed saying, "I used to sell drugs," and so brags about things. So in the interview with Candace Owens and Tucker, he says, "Oh, I was trying to." Yeah, I'm being accused of stealing TikTok money. Like, no one said that. That wasn't the accusation. The accusation is that he was taking money from OnlyFans because the TikTok was how the girls that work for him, with differing levels of consent, would generate attract people on TikTok to get them to the OnlyFans, and then get. But he talks about this in interviews, right? And now he's pretending like he was just helping girls out. He said how much money he made, and that he was bribing Romanian officials, that he was doing all sorts of things, and people think of him as this 4D chess. That's not even like just a D chess. There's nothing there. It's 0D. But people hate the gynocentrism so much that they're willing to entertain madness, I would say. It's not just
I
stupid,
didn't.
it's mad.
Yeah, it is, and he deserves his trial, let's say. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if he did break some laws in relation to women and sexuality there.
He kept saying that he would manipulate girls, that he would take their passports and everything. He admitted to all of
Oh
this.
wow!
The reason things get so out of hand with how long they're preparing, because his supporters keep saying, "Hey, why didn't they charge him yet? Why didn't they X and why didn't they Y?" Like, this isn't like Law and Order, the show. Like they're going to, you know, accuse him of indictment, right? Send him an indictment, and then you start hearing dum bum 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 bum, and then you get all these cool court orders, and shouting and holding very persuasive speeches. No,
Yeah,
it's going to be a lot of compiling, a lot of translation needs to be done because it's in
yeah,
Romania. So you need to translate everything into Romanian, and that has to be done through official channels. You can't hire a freelance, translator.
yeah.
um, and then you need to make as massive a case as you can. So it's going to take a while, but it's so obvious that because he brags about it, or used to brag about it, and now all of a sudden, whoops, these people want to accuse me of things. But he's gathered, and one thing I really don't look forward to is, because of people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens showing him friendly support,
Yeah.
even though people like, I think Peterson called him the worst scum or something like that, scum of the earth, right? Because of people like Tucker, who is supposed to have shown this willingness to stand up and everything, all of that type of resistance to the mainstream, conservative Inc. way of thinking. Once he gets accused and convicted of what he did, everyone is going to the left is just going to have a massive holiday,
Yeah.
saying, well, here you go, your hero Tucker Carlson, and all of the other people who have defended him. And great, you think you are starting to get ahead in the culture war because they overdid it with the trans movement, and that's going to be annihilated.
Yeah, I was disappointed with Tucker's
Yep.
interview because he usually doesn't pull punches like that, and it actually made me wonder if he was if Tucker's actually naive to Tate's real message and just wanted to use him as a way to make a certain point about masculinity in the culture or something. Because he didn't even touch on that stuff. It was as if he had no awareness of it.
The other possibility, if you are trying to rationalize his behavior, is that if you do a friendly interview as opposed to a confrontational one, that these people, especially narcissists, are more than willing to give out more than they usually would. But I think that's a massive cope. Like Tucker went there, like, oh no, go ahead, present all of the true things that can later be used in court. Saying, well, use to give more. That is something journalists do. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's invented, to try and cope with Tucker making a faux pas. I honestly think that it's not the case. But the idea is, you go and interview him and set him up with questions. You just phrase them in a friendly way that would contradict his previous statements to show that he's a liar and a deceiver. And that can be used to show how wrong he was and how he's now trying to run away from what he said before. And you have this all in one place. But I don't buy it. I think people like to court controversy for the sake of views, for the sake of, well, I stood up to the system. I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer stood up to the system.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's not a good thing. This is why I keep saying don't have your political or cultural positions as your basis, and then you become a Christian because of it. So have your Christianity be a function of your cultural position. Have your cultural position be a function of your Christianity.
Yeah.
That's why if you have a gynocentric society like we do, the answer isn't to be as, anti-woman as possible. That's just not a position. You're still basing your positions on a revolutionary spirit, and that's not godly. That's not going to work. As a Christian, you should not be doing that. And we shouldn't get into this right now.
No, I know. Okay, well, we'll do another one sooner than later.
Absolutely.
I'd be happy to keep doing these. It's a lot of fun. So then we'll just conclude. But I wanted to mention that just tie some of this together. That what I've encountered with Orthodoxy so far over the last year is that with any kind of quandary or any kind of question about life, that they're a really coherent and solid and thought out, and even lives of saints who have lived through whatever kind of quandary that you might have. It's such an amazing body of work,
and sometimes not even lived through, sometimes martyred.
Yeah, exactly. But that there's something there about how you can actually conduct yourself, about how to live that does bring peace, not necessarily always happiness, but in the difficulties, in the unhappiness, in the struggles, there is this sense of peace that's like foundational to the rest of it. It makes frames the struggle in the proper way. It frames the difficulties of life in a way that's actually satisfying. Not satisfying on this hedonistic level, dopamine level, but satisfying to the soul. That there's some sense of peace and joy that transcends physical pain, existential suffering.
To all things, including joy and suffering. I would just like to give the example of Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who was given to the lions. He went to it joyfully. said, I will happily have the jaws of these beasts be my tomb, right? Because he's dying for the Lord. He knows what he's doing. He knows, he could have resisted, right? St. Stephen, the proto-martyr, could have tried to run. But no, you're not going to run from anything. Ultimately, there is no running from God. As we see in Revelations, the book of Revelations, the cries of the martyrs cry out from under the altar in heaven, and they will be answered at one point. So God has given us and will give us as much time as we can have to repent. But there will come a time where the scales have tipped so far towards sin and death and demons that it will be righted. So we're all going to suffer, but at least make it long-suffering, make it godly.
Yeah. All right. Beautiful place to stop. So I'll talk to you soon, Sava, and maybe see you on Jim Bob after this.
Maybe, and maybe in Niche, if you should you decide to go.
Yes, I will definitely be there. It's just a matter of when. So yeah,
okay,
sometime very soon.
Let me know then.
Of course. All right. See you soon.
Thank you for having me. God bless.
Thanks for being on. God bless. Enjoy.